You think the problem is your tone, your timing, your wording. It isn't. The real problem is that your boundary interrupts their access, and narcissists live on access. Not just access to your time, but access to your guilt, attention, and self-doubt. That is the one boundary they can never truly respect, your separate right to choose. The moment you decide without their permission, their mask slips, and the backlash begins. If that sounds familiar, you are not difficult. You are finally becoming unavailable to control. And that changes everything, because control dies the second your choices stop orbiting their reactions. I know how confusing this feels, because narcissists train you to mistake invasion for closeness. They call it love, concern, honesty, family, loyalty, teamwork, communication, or just being open. But underneath all those innocent words is the same demand: stay emotionally available to me. Stay reachable when I want you, explainable when I pressure you, and soft when I push. That is why your simple no creates more chaos than their actual cruelty ever did. Because cruelty keeps the hierarchy intact, boundaries expose it, and exposure terrifies controlling people. A healthy person may dislike a limit, but they can still respect your right. A narcissistic person hears your limit and immediately translates it into rejection, defiance, betrayal, disrespect. Not because your boundary is cruel, but because your boundary proves they are not entitled. And entitlement is the engine underneath almost everything they do to you. Once you see that, their behavior stops feeling random and starts feeling painfully predictable. They did not explode because you were unclear. They explode because you became harder to use. That difference matters, because clarity is not what they were ever actually negotiating with. They were negotiating with your fear, your empathy, your fatigue, and your need to be fair. So let's name the boundary more clearly. It is not about rules, it is access. Your time is access. Your explanations are access. Your guilt is access. Your hope is access. And narcissists can tolerate many things, but they cannot tolerate reduced access without punishment. Watch what happens when you stop over-explaining. Suddenly they act confused, wounded, offended, suspicious. You said nothing worked for me, and they act like you started a war. Not because the sentence was harsh, but because the sentence closed a familiar doorway. They were planning to walk through your confusion, and now the door stays shut. This shows up in families all the time, especially with guilt dressed up as love. A parent says, "After everything I've done, you can't even answer one question." But the question is never just one question. It is a demand for emotional entry. They want to know who you saw, what you spent, why you changed, who influenced you. They call it care, but it is surveillance wearing a softer, more innocent face. And when you reply, "I'm not discussing that," the real performance begins. Now you are secretive. Now you are selfish. Now you are cold. Now you've changed. What changed is not your love. What changed is their clearance level. They lost the password to your inner world, and they resent the lock. The same thing happens with exes who still feel entitled to your emotional availability. They text late at night just checking in, hoping your loneliness will reopen the door. When you don't answer, they send something sharper, colder, or suddenly sentimental. Because when charm fails, pressure enters. When pressure fails, pity enters. When pity fails, rage. Different costumes, same mission. Regain access to your attention and your nervous system. That is why silence from them is rarely neutral after a boundary. It is often punishment. Healthy silence makes space. Narcissistic silence makes you sweat, chase, apologize, and self-abandon. And the trap works because you have a conscience, while they study your conscience like equipment. They learn what guilt opens you. They learn what fear softens you. They learn when you fold. So when you finally create a boundary, they do not experience it as information. They experience it as a supply interruption, and that is why they escalate so fast. You can see this at work too, especially with bosses who feed on blurred lines. They text after hours, dump urgency on you, then praise loyalty when you comply. The praise is part of the trap because it rewards your lack of separation. Then the first time you say, "I'm available during work hours," everything shifts. Suddenly, you're not a team player. Suddenly, you are inflexible, ungrateful, hard to manage. No, you are simply no longer volunteering your private life to stabilize their disorganization. That is what narcissistic backlash often is, their chaos crashing into your new wall. And they hate that wall because it proves their feelings are not your assignment. This is the deeper truth most people miss. Boundaries do not trigger narcissists accidentally. Boundaries trigger the exact insecurity they spend their whole life trying to dominate in others. The insecurity is simple. If they cannot control access, they cannot control the story. And if they cannot control the story, they might have to face themselves. That is why they twist your boundary into cruelty. It protects their image from scrutiny. They say you are dramatic, rude, ungrateful, disrespectful, unstable, impossible, selfish, or influence. Translation: your independence makes me lose position, and I need to punish that immediately. This is where many people get trapped again, because they start defending their goodness. They explain the boundary, soften the boundary, justify the boundary, apologize for the boundary. And every explanation becomes new material to debate, distort, weaponize, or dismiss. That is why one of your strongest weapons is saying less after the limit. Not more convincing, not more caring, not more detail, more clean, more final, more boring. Narcissists feed on emotional openings. Flat language starves the game. Predictable responses kill momentum. Say, my answer is the same, then stop. Say, I already answered that, then stop. Notice the power there. You are not winning through force. You are removing fuel. You are stepping out of the courtroom. They keep building around your right to exist. And that is the advanced nuance here. A boundary is not control. Control tells another person what they are allowed to feel, think, or become. A boundary tells them what access ends if they keep crossing your line. That matters, because narcissists love accusing you of control whenever you stop cooperating. You say, don't yell at me. I'll leave the conversation if it continues. That is not control. That is consequence. And consequences are kryptonite to entitled people. Because consequences mean your body, time, and peace are no longer public property. That is the boundary they never respect, your right to stop being available. Not available for interrogation. Not available for guilt. Not available for damage control after their behavior. Once you understand that, their reactions stop feeling like proof you are wrong. Their reaction is often proof that your boundary touched the exact nerve it needed to. Anger can mean lost control. Guilt trips can mean lost access. Smears can mean image repair. And sudden tears can mean your compliance is slipping beyond their reach. That does not mean every emotional person is manipulative. Not every difficult person is toxic. But healthy people can hear no without launching punishment, revenge, confusion campaigns, or character attacks. They may feel disappointed. They may ask a question. Then they recalibrate. They do not hunt. Narcissists hunt. They test the fence. They circle the fence. Then they recruit others. This is why smear campaigns often start after you quietly reduce contact. Private control failed, so public image control takes over. Now they need witnesses, allies, echo chambers. They tell people you are cold, unstable, selfish, disrespectful, impossible, brainwashed, or suddenly arrogant. But the hidden translation is brutal and simple. You stopped being useful in silence. And once usefulness ends, they often rewrite history to protect their ego. This is why strategy matters more than speeches in some situations. Not every boundary needs confrontation. If you live with them, work for them, or share children, direct truth may inflame danger. In those cases, the boundary may sound smaller, flatter, more administrative than emotional. Not available then. I'll respond tomorrow. I'm keeping this in writing. My decision stands. That is not weakness. That is camouflage. And sometimes camouflage is wisdom, not fear. Because the goal is not to teach a narcissist fairness. The goal is to protect your stability. And stability begins the moment you stop making your peace negotiable again. That means not rescuing the silence after you set a limit. Let it sit. That pause is a weapon, because manipulators depend on your discomfort more than your agreement. When you rush to fill the space, you hand them fresh handles to grab. When you stay still, they meet something unfamiliar, a person who will not self-betray for peace. That is why calm scares them more than anger. Anger still reveals attachment. Calm reveals detachment. And detachment is not cruelty. It is what happens when clarity finally outruns hope. For a long time, you probably believed one more explanation would finally unlock understanding. But narcissistic misunderstanding is often not confusion. It is refusal shaped like confusion. They understand enough to hurt you precisely, dodge accountability smoothly, and reverse blame instantly. So stop measuring them by what they say they meant. Measure them by what they protect. They protect access. They protect image. They protect advantage. They do not protect your peace. And once you see that, the guilt starts losing its grip on you. Because guilt only works when you still believe love should feel like surrender. Real love can survive your no. Real respect can survive your distance. Real care can wait. Narcissistic attachment cannot wait, because waiting feels like losing ownership of the emotional channel. That is why they push harder exactly when you begin getting healthier. Your healing is not invisible. They feel it in your shorter replies, calmer face, cleaner exits. They feel it when you stop auditioning for basic respect. They feel it when you stop pleading. They feel it when you stop giving them emotional essays just to justify your own humanity. And that is usually the moment they become their most dramatic version. Because drama is often the smoke released when control catches fire inside. So if you are facing backlash right now, do not read it as failure. Read it carefully. Ask, what access did my boundary interrupt that they were counting on? That question will expose the whole game faster than 100 arguments ever could. Maybe they lost the right to reach you anytime. Maybe they lost the right to interrogate. Maybe they lost the right to define your motives, spend your energy, or rewrite your memory. Whatever it is, their disrespect is information. It tells you where their dependency was hiding. And once you know that, you stop taking the behavior personally. You start taking it seriously. Personally means you keep asking, why am I not enough for them to change? Seriously means you ask, what pattern is this showing me, and what protection follows? That shift is everything. It moves you from wounded confusion into quiet, strategic power. And quiet power is the thing narcissists fear most, because it cannot be baited. It does not need applause. It does not need permission. It does not beg to be understood. It simply knows where the line is and what happens when someone crosses it. So if you needed permission to stop explaining your no, here it is. If you needed permission to disappoint people who only liked your access, take it. If you needed permission to become harder to manipulate, that permission starts with separation. You are allowed to be private, unavailable, undecided, unreachable, unpersuaded, and unimpressed. You are allowed to leave questions unanswered when the questioner has not earned access. You are allowed to say no without writing a defense brief for your existence. And you are allowed to notice who turns vicious the moment you remember that. Let that information sober you into truth, cleaner decisions, and the boundary that says, I am mine. And the more calmly you live that truth, the less power they have. If this hit something real, say what woke you up, subscribe, and protect your peace like it matters.